All right, we're looking at another collection of late round nose tackle options, and we're going to be starting with a little bit of an undersized one. Cameron Young of Mississippi State could not figure out his age, but he has the size of a 3-tech, and yet I think he plays like a 1-tech. So we're going to talk about him here. 6'3", 304 pounds. Long arms, though, 34 and a half. That's pretty nice. That's like Mozzie Smith territory. 10-inch hands, like that. Ran pretty respectable times at the combine, although he didn't do that much. 5.140, 1.8 10-yard split, which is perfectly fine for a nose tackle. You would expect maybe a little bit better from a guy his size, but not if it's the way that he plays. The big boards, what do they think of this guy? Basically, ESPN and Sports Illustrated think he could be like a 5th-round pick. PFF and the Draft Network are more like, and CBS are more like 7th-round pick. CBS and the Draft Network both think he could go undrafted. The aggregate tells you he's a 7th-round pick, 235 overall from the database. So I kind of look at Cameron Young and I go probably a 7th-round pick, maybe a 6th-rounder. Played a good amount of games the last 2 years, 13 games last year, 11 games the year before. Makes a decent number of plays himself. He's got a combined 72 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss. He's had 1 sack and 1 pick. And Mississippi State's run defense has been respectable. 3.6 in 2021, 3.9 in 2022. So what I can say about Cameron Young as a player, one thing I noticed, I was watching the Alabama tape, is that there are some really impressive snaps. There are some really good snaps where he's getting doubled and he's still holding strong against the run. He's got the long arms, which gives him an advantage. His hands are also very strong, and these are the kinds of things that are really going to help you in the trenches. He's pretty athletic when moving laterally. Like, I was watching the Alabama tape, and I did notice he was able to move pretty well. He's also played 0-tech and 1-tech in college football. Mississippi State, if he actually runs the 3-3-5, which we're supposedly going to run a lot this year. So he has experience in that 3-3-5. So the issues are what you would expect when you get down this low in the draft. He's not a great athlete. He doesn't win at the snap. I did notice he got stuck on blockers a lot when I looked at some of the tape. Admittedly, a lot of the tape that I looked at was against Alabama, and I mean, you're playing the best of the best there most of the time. Certainly doesn't offer very much as a pass rusher. He's got 1 sack across the last 24 games he's played, and his technique overall lacks refinement. There are some snaps where he just doesn't look particularly good. It seems to me that he's just a little inconsistent. One thing I did like, though, is that he's always out there. He's always out there grinding. It seems like he doesn't take that many plays off, unlike some of the guys I even talked about in day 2. So right now, Cameron Young is a one-dimensional run stuffer who needs some work even in that regard. Needs to be a little more consistent, I think. Although part of that might be because he's on the field so much, he has to pick his spots a little bit. He does have a good resume for nose tackle work. And like I said in the earlier video, if you're going to move off of Al Woods and you know you're not going to get anything out of Brian Monet this year, you kind of need 2 nose tackles. So you get 1 stud, and then if your backup is Cameron Young and you're saying, okay, you've got 15 to 20 snaps a game, go do what you can with them, I think that could work. I think that makes sense to me. So I'm not against it. He is a little bit undersized, but the way that he plays, it's nose tackle stuff. He gets double teamed and he holds up. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for. So at the end of the day, I said if you could get him in the 5th round or 6th round as a reserve type player, I would be on that. Now, it sounds to me like you might be able to get him later than that, like in the 7th potentially. I would love it. But honestly, if we spent a 6th round or 5th round on him, I'm cool with it. Okay, next guy, PJ Mustipher of Mustipher from Penn State. A little bit older guy, 24 years old. As you get later in the draft, you start finding these older guys. This is 6'4", 320 pounds. Arms are okay, 32 3/4. Not great, but for this part of the draft, pretty much what you expect. Tiny hands, though, 9-inch hands. He's got the Alex Smith hands. Don't know what to make of that, really. His 40-yard dash, pretty slow, 5.4, so he's an Ika, basically. 10.88, 10-yard split. Vertical, 27.5. His broad was really low, so not much of an athlete here. 8-foot flat broad. Very slow 3-cone, over 8 seconds, over 5-second 20-yard shuttle. 19 bench press reps. Not a very good combine overall for Mustipher, would be fair to say. A couple of the big boards do not have him. Of course, Tank doesn't, but PFF does not even have him listed right now. And of the big boards that actually have him listed that are, notorious, the only one that actually has him drafted is Sports Illustrated. They think he's a late 7th round pick. ESPN, CBS, and the Draft Network all think he's going to be a prime UDFA. The mock draft database, though, actually has him at 259, which would make him very close to Mr. Irrelevant, I think. So they think he's going to get drafted, but only barely. So could go either way in terms of that. The last 2 years, obviously 2022 is the big year when evaluating him. He had 13 games, 37 tackles, but really no plays made in the backfield, no gap penetrating, just half a tackle for loss. But Penn State had a really good run defense, 3.3 yards per carry. And the year before, he only played 5 games, but he had 27 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. Penn State still had a pretty decent yard per carry average. So, what is this guy? I looked at some of the tape, and one thing I noticed, I was watching Penn State play, I think it was Auburn. I believe it was Auburn. I noticed that it seemed like Auburn, when they ran the ball, always wanted to run the ball away from him. And when they did run the ball towards him, he was a pretty good playmaker. He made a couple plays on plays where Auburn ran the ball his direction. For the most part, it seemed like Auburn was like, okay, we're not going to run towards big old PJ. So there does seem to be some credibility there. There does seem to be some acknowledgement that he's pretty good against the run. He's got a great build for filling up space and taking on blockers. For a guy you could get as a UDFA, he's got a reasonable amount of arm length. And he does make plays, sometimes a little bit down the field, sometimes a little bit up the field. He's got a high motor. Not like these testing numbers scream big dude who stands in the middle, but he is a little bit more effective than you would expect at making plays beyond just the line of scrimmage. He is inconsistent in technique. I did notice him get washed out on some plays against Auburn. Like they could just push him out of the play here and there. The ability to be a gap penetrator and playmaker is rarely comes up. It does. Like if you look at 2021, you'd be thinking one thing, and then 2022 told a different story. And he does need to become a more cerebral player. I think that's pretty fair. He can get outsmarted in one-on-one battles in the trench. And overall, I think that his body, like the way his body is built, plus the fact you could get him as a UDFA makes him very interesting. But I don't think you could really expect anything from him at first. Maybe by year 2, he can be like a situational nose tackle, and that's okay. But can't expect a ton from him, and we need somebody who can play now. I don't know if this is the guy, but I would not mind picking him up as a UDFA, maybe even in the 7th round, because whatever. Okay, final guy we're going to take a look at in the nose tackle list is Nesta Silvera of Arizona State. 23 years old, he's transferred around a little bit, had a pretty decent career. Another guy who's a little bit smaller than the typical nose tackle, but he's a nose tackle. 6'2", 304 pounds. Arms are almost 33 inches, which is very respectable, actually, for this part of the draft. Almost 10-inch hands. Ran a 5.1640, 1.77 10-yard split, which is actually pretty healthy for a nose. Nice vertical and broad as well for a nose tackle. 29.5 inches on the vert and 9 feet 2 inches on the broad. So the big boards are kind of all over here. ESPN actually loves this guy and thinks he could be even a late 3rd, but probably an early 4th. Nowhere else seemed to like him that much. The Draft Network thought he was a 5th rounder. CBS thought he was a 7th rounder. Sports Illustrated thought he was a fringe 7th rounder, and PFF thinks he's going to go undrafted. The consensus on the mock draft database was he's going to be either right around Mr. Irrelevant or go undrafted. So definitely some differing takes on Nesta Silvera here, but the overall consensus, the general consensus right now is that he'll be lucky to get drafted. He's played a lot over the last 2 years. 2022 actually made a decent amount of plays himself. 56 tackles for a guy like Silvera is really good. 4.5 for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3 pass knockdowns. Arizona State's run defense was not very good, though, 5.2 yards per carry. The previous year, he played 11 games, 38 tackles, so one thing you can say about him is that he's making his own plays. He's not just creating plays for other players. 5.5 tackles for loss in 11 games for a nose tackle is very nice. And the run defense overall was good for Silvera's team, 3.9. That is pretty good. So this guy was actually a top recruit out of high school. He was like a big 4-star recruit that people thought was going to be the next great defensive lineman in college football. Didn't happen that way. He is still really strong. He can take over run defense duties and redefine the line of scrimmage just via his strength. He's also pretty quick off the snap, which is something I pointed out with his combine numbers, quicker than you would expect for a nose tackle. He's smart. He can diagnose plays very quickly and figure out where the run play is going based off pre-snap stuff and stuff that happens right after the snap. His agility is nice for a nose tackle, and he even offers a little bit of something as a bull rush. He can just push people back using his immense strength. Now, the issues with him are that he doesn't really have any pass rush moves beyond the bull rush. Again, I'm going to say as a nose tackle, that's not the end of the world, but it is something. He's decently long for a guy in this range, but when you combine the fact that he's only 6'2" and his arms are not even 33 inches, it's certainly not ideal. Now, granted, that's why he's potentially available late in the draft or UDFA. He does occasionally get stuck on blocks. I watched a little bit of tape, and, he's a Pac-12 player, so I'm kind of familiar with him anyway. He can get stuck on blocks. At the end of the day, you're probably looking at a guy who's just going to be an early down player, somebody who plays on rundowns or neutral downs, and that's no problem for a guy you can get very, very late. But there is definitely a ceiling here, I think, despite the fact that he was a top high school prospect. And of the obviously one-dimensional run stuffers in this draft who may be available very late, Silvera might be the most appealing, honestly. Like, I might rather have Silvera than Mustipher because he's strong and he's smart. So I wouldn't mind getting him in the 6th. I really wouldn't. If we got him in the 6th round, I wouldn't have a big problem with that. But if we can get him later, all the better. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks.